because what I
Yeah.
really want to talk with you about today is like this movement. I don't know, this mini online smart people revival, people approaching Christianity, um, and like why
Yeah, it's
it's
wild, isn't it?
happening.
It's wild.
Uh, I'm a convert. I converted. I was baptized almost 5 years ago.
I see.
5 years ago in April. You grew up in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I was born and raised in it. My dad was not. He was nothing. He was a
Mm,
non-church going person. His dad was Jewish and his mom was Presbyterian, but they didn't really do anything. And then married my mom. And then when my older brother was receiving his first communion, which in that would have been second grade, my dad entered, received his first, he was receiving instruction and received his first communion on the same day. So virtually all my life, my dad has been a practicing Catholic. But yeah, that's my faith tradition from the beginning.
okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things we're talking about speaks to this mini revival or
Mhm.
e-revival. I don't know what we should call it.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
there's a movement, right? There's something in the air.
It really
Um,
feels that way. You feel these people talking about it. I mean, Rogan's talking about it. I mean, Russell Brand is talking about it.
I've never
Um,
heard Rogan say anything good about Christianity or
yeah, I
religion
know. I mean,
before. No, that's
yeah, no. I mean, in fact, if anything, gosh, he was blistering and somewhat fairly blistering about the church's inability to deal with the abuse crisis in any
mhm,
meaningful way, to the point where the last time I heard Rogan say anything about Christianity was basically it was a bunch of child molesters.
mm,
And as a Catholic, you're sitting there listening to it, you're like, man, I don't think he's right, but boy, I totally get why he's saying what he's saying, you know. But wow, but to watch him, this is like a weird moment, and and like you've got people across the pond, you've got people like Louise Perry and Mary Harrington, and the trigonometry guys are talking about it. Justin Brierly's been doing
oh,
some amazing
Ayan
work.
Hirsi Ali,
Ali,
right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Tom Holland and all that, and it's yeah, we seem to be going through some sort of strange, almost counterintuitive moment.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like our best evangelists are like the non-believers. Like
Yeah.
it's
Well, Jordan
been
Peterson, right? I mean, to me,
Jordan Peterson and
he's
also Tom Holland, right? Like
yeah,
his book has led a lot of people to the church, and he's, as far as I know, just kind of respects Christianity but doesn't
yeah.
consider himself one.
That's my
Um,
appreciation for it too, Justin. I mean, that's what he's doing, and there's a real power to that. And I say that as a look. I'm an out loud, uh, proud believer. I teach at a Catholic school. I teach kids every day, and part of my persona or shtick or what have you is I'm a Catholic guy, right? I'm an adult Catholic who takes this stuff seriously, and so therefore it has certain benefits because people know where I'm coming from, and I'm not shy about it. But you know, yeah, there are going to be certain kids who don't listen to what I have to say in that regard because they'll see me as a kind of well, of course, Mr. Zelden would say that,
hmm.
and so
It almost seems
whereas
like these guys are like more objective or something
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You see the same dynamic play out with certain kind of conservative, progressive dynamics. It's like
Mm,
if a progressive will say, the thing, then like, see, look, I mean, that and I get that to a certain extent, right? That brings with it a certain objectivity, quote unquote, that maybe is a little bit more salient for people, who are watching, doing their best to call balls and strikes.
yeah. From my perspective, I hope my shtick or what I want my shtick to be is like I was, this hippie atheist tech guy,
Mhm.
um, hippie atheist Buddhist ish tech guy,
Sure, sure.
I am a Christian. Like
Yeah,
I managed to
yeah,
make that leap, and it wasn't easy. There were steps along the way. There was many
yeah.
steps, but I want to like just tell my story a little bit or help other people tell their stories, so that people can see like that's possible. Like you don't. Um, the interview that struck me lately was Jordan Hall. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go
like
ahead.
Jordan
Yeah.
Hall just kind of gave his testimony about why he converted to Christianity, and he was saying that like I've explored all these different spiritual paths, but I never thought Christianity was an option because I had like
Yeah.
this bias against it. And I think a lot of people that come from where I come from, that come from Silicon Valley, that come from that tech world, have that bias against it, where they'll survey every kind of spirituality except for Christianity.
Yeah.
And then it seems
Does
to
that
be like
resonate for you? I mean, was that watching him do that? Is that how it was for you at a time?
I was like a little bit. I felt extra authentic and cool and open minded because
Okay.
most of my friends were into every religion except for Christianity. But I would also like go to Christian churches on like Christmas and Easter or something like
Okay,
that.
okay. So
So
you
so
were
I
sort
was
of
like
you were
the
so magnanimous that you could kind of dabble without fear of it catching.
yeah. So like I used to go to like Hindu kirtans. You know,
Okay.
I remember I was supposed to like visualize like sort of my ideal people that I wanted to be like for some hippie exercise I was doing, and I was like Jesus, Krishna, and Buddha.
Sure.
Like you know,
Just line
like
them up. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like I want to be like one third Jesus, one third Krishna, one third Buddha, right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so and so
How you deal with that extra one third, two thirds, that's different. But anyway, you get your third, you get your threes lined up there. This is solid. This is solid.
yeah. So that's kind of where I was at. So I was a little bit different, and part of that came from I think just being politically more conservative and libertarian. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
volunteered for Ron Paul
Sure.
before for his
Sure.
campaigns, and so I was around like a lot of Christians, and uh, I maybe I had like a better view of them than a lot of people, and like I was never one of these communist Buddhists. I was always the weirdo Republican Buddhist. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
made more sense for me to enjoy some Chesterton or something like that.
Yeah. I've always felt that being a conservative, being an intellectually minded sort of conservative is a little bit of a superpower because you're constantly around a kind of surrounded by messaging and kind of media coverage that is so clearly and obviously framed in such a way that those that form the frame and love the frame can't see the frame. And so for me it's always been a kind of I've had a kind of perspective on things, and I've an ability to be a little bit heterodox because I'm always just okay. Well, what is the frame saying? Like, okay, like I know when they say this, that's what they really mean. So for me, that was always a way of keeping myself honest about what I actually thought because I'm constantly having to check code against a kind of unexplored, unacknowledged bias. So that's an interesting, that you were sort of this weird libertarian inflected hippie gives you a slightly different perspective. I think that's interesting to me.
Yeah, and then when Jordan Peterson came out,
Mhm.
that was maybe got me a little bit more over the edge. Like I started being more solidly into Christianity, or more of my attention started going to Christianity. Uh,
So let me ask you this. So I distinctly remember watching lecture one, of his series on Genesis. And at that time, I'm a long-standing,
mm,
Roman Catholic. Like I said, I though I don't have a degree in theology, I read a decent amount of theology and philosophy and scripture, and I'm a teacher of literature, so I'm steeped in all this sort of stuff. And I was blown away by it. I'm just remember it was early in the morning, because I get up early before all my kids get up and my wife gets up, and I sort of that's the kind of like me time. I do a little reading and a little praying, and then I go running, and all before everybody wakes up. And I remember for like I stumbled upon the biblical series, and I'm watching this thing, and I want to wake up my wife and say, "You got to see this. This is great stuff. This is real deal stuff." And I was smart enough, well read enough to know, like, okay, I can see what he's doing there. I would disagree with him there, but man, what a really fresh take. And so for me, it was totally energizing as a believer. So I'm always interested for folks like you, what exactly was it if we're talking about the same thing, what exactly was it that sort of cracked open something that had been kind of fused shut?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it gave me permission to engage with the text on my own terms and
Oh,
engage with like Christianity on my own terms. Like one thing I
like,
started doing, I started reading the Bible more actually after
mhm,
listening to the biblical series. And when I grew up Jehovah's Witness as a kid, and that left a
okay,
really bad taste in my mouth.
okay,
And because they're a very like intellectually narrow
yeah,
tradition, they're a bit cultish, and they
yeah,
tell you what to think about everything. And
sure,
then like, but when I had the permission to approach the text with wonder, and like
yes, yes,
with confusion, like reading the Sermon on the Mount and saying like, what is this guy trying to say? Like something I've never read anything else like this
yeah,
before, or
yeah,
but it's weird, and
mm,
to let it be weird, and then to kind of like come up with my own ways of understanding it, or to grapple with it, to give me the permission to like approach the tradition without someone telling me what to think.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, right,
I
because
think
you
I think it was important.
yeah, no, that's great. I love that because I'm a fairly high in openness, traditional minded guy.
99th percentile here, according to JBP.
Yeah, like I'm same. And so I'm kind of a weird trad, right? I mean,
Mm,
on that score. And I never, whereas a lot of my trad friends are like hyper neurotic, and I remember talking with one of my trad friends about Jordan Peterson, and he couldn't help himself, but he loved it.
mm,
Right. But and he was like, but it was working against, like the received opinion,
mm,
the received and well documented and settled, opinion about what we are to
mm,
think about, let's say in this case, Genesis, right? And he was looking at what JBP was doing, and he's like, man, he's so free,
mm,
and it's funny because again, for someone who's, like orthodox, small o orthodox, I was just like, yeah, like I okay, like that was not what attracted me. That was not what was attractive to me. What was attractive to me was he was approaching the book of Genesis as if it were part of a tradition that we could experience wisdom. Kind of
mm,
what you're talking about. Like you were sort of free to read the book. But what is Genesis, right? Because there's a reason why it endures, and it's not a conspiracy, or certainly not a political conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of wisdom, isn't it? Right, so that
mm,
you can read the sort of the hyper compacted wisdom, of 3 or 4 lines of scripture. And he was there seeing like, look at all this richness in its 4 verses, and you're like, right, it's almost like it almost has a kind of super saturated quality, like a good poem. And of course, for
mm.
me, that's the tradition out of which I come from professionally. I teach poetry, and I'm like, oh, that's of course, right, of course, like, duh, how did I not see this, right? And so for me, that was the sort of the excitement of it. And I could tell that he was moving the needle. Like people were watching, people like are watching this
Mhm.
stuff and like, oh, wait, maybe there's something here, you know.
Yeah, I recall, like the Cain and Abel story and how he unpacked it.
So
Um,
brilliant,
yeah,
so
and
so rich.
it made me like I was like thinking about all the pieces of my life and like, how am I like Cain? Like, oh, and how he talks about sacrifice. Like, am I
Oh,
offering
oh,
right
yeah.
sacrifice? And then
Yeah.
he says like, if your life isn't going right, or how you want it to, like figure out the right sacrifice to make, and it'll
Ah,
improve. I'm
so
like,
great.
I've never heard anybody talk about
Yeah.
anything like that before. But yeah, I'd say there's maybe to underline the point. There's kind of two things that were
Mhm.
going on. One was he was modeling what it looks like to be a high openness person approaching
Ah,
religion, like where
yeah.
like most high openness people have left religion. Like
Yeah, that's
I
right.
have a theory called bio Christianity, which is
Mhm.
that people that are predisposed to high openness have evaporated, and it's the low openness people that are left. So that's kind of
That's right. No,
that's a
yeah, I think
struggle
you're
for the
exactly
church.
right. Yeah, I think
And,
you're
and, and
exactly right.
and a lot of these evangelists that we're seeing pop up, like people like Peugeot, and Peterson, are these high openness people that are left, that didn't leave.
Yeah.
Like, and they stand out like little diamonds because we need them, and people like me that our high openness, need them to someone to model faith for us.
Yeah.
And because when I grew up, and the other thing is like the actual wisdom of these texts and like a demonstration of it, because like I really dismissed the Bible and religion growing up because it seemed to me like I don't know, like a suicide pact for like dogmatic, stupid people.
Sure.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
like these are these rules placed on your life because we're stupid and dogmatic, and it gives us comfort, and we can't think through it. So you and I was much smarter than most people I was around growing up. I like inherited relatively big brains from
Yeah.
my family,
Yeah.
and I was just like, well, this is for dumb people, and I'm not dumb, so I need to leave.
And
And
that's
to
totally
see
real,
him,
man. That's
yeah,
totally real. That's
it's a
totally
real part
true.
of what
Yeah.
Christianity is
Yeah.
in America or in the world in general. Like,
Yeah.
there's a huge percentage of that.
Yeah.
Like, they're just people that aren't curious at all
Mhm.
about any of the deeper stuff in the religion or history or where we come from. And it's a shame because like there's so much profundity in the tradition. Like some of the smartest people that have ever lived, like brilliant people, have been Christians.
Oh
And
yeah.
have
See that's what got me. That's exactly what got me. So very similar, that in my attempt to leave in sort of, spectacular fashion as a late teen, I just bought the line, right? The sort of the Rolling Stone magazine version of, Christians are dumb and they want to like inflict their nastiness on freedom, whatever, all that stuff, right? That was just I bought totally into that. And it was really, you know, you don't have to be a Christian to read something like the Confessions and say to yourself, man, this Augustine guy is pretty smart. You don't have to be a Christian to read Shakespeare and say, man, like this guy's like pretty smart and pretty sophisticated and pretty talented. And he was crazy. You start doing this game where like, well, God, there were like a lot of people who were Christians, and you know, I'm not smarter than Thomas Aquinas. I'm not smarter, than any of these cats. And so maybe there's something to it. Um, and so that for me, that broke down a lot of my resistance, my sort of latent arrogance. And I was never like a score off the charts SAT guy, but I was pretty intelligent, and I was thoughtful and pretty sensitive, and knew that something was wrong with the world, and so I was just humbled by encountering big brained ancient Christians. Ancient, of course, was anything older than 1952, right? And when you start going down that path, I'm like, oh wait, and even like, and again, one of the things that I admired about Peterson is like, he would take somebody like Nietzsche, right? And Nietzsche is clearly, not a Christian.
he has a book.
And
He has a book. One of my favorite Nietzsche book is The Antichrist.
yeah,
So it
right.
tells you where he's coming from.
Yeah, right. And yet, I had learned to read Nietzsche generously, and in my own I had a benefit of a great education, and and so here was Peterson not trashing Christianity, and looking at somebody like Nietzsche or Jung, and sort of doing it all together, and I'm like, well, this is not a normal cat. This is somebody who is trying, like you said, modeling what it could be to be high in openness, but also a fundamentally pious person in that old-fashioned way of piety, like like a pious Aeneas from the Aeneid, that you take, your father and the household gods seriously, like it's part of your patrimony, it's part of the thing that you're
Mm-hmm.
meant to sort of hold within you and to pass on, that kind of piety. And so here he was doing his thing. I'm like, well, this is a different cat, doing
Yeah.
like impressive things. That you, but man, but boy, does he tick off, at least initially, he made a lot of those sort of conservative and traditional Christians very nervous,
Still
and
does. Still
still no,
does.
that's
Like,
true. Maybe I'm just not in those same
if
circles,
you
probably.
like, there's interior spaces and exterior spaces, and then like
Ah,
the interior spaces in Orthodoxy, never are super friendly to Peterson. They're always like, they criticize him for his, sort of heterodoxy, really,
Interesting.
like his all the ways he's like not traditional pious Orthodox, and
Sure.
it's the external spaces or the spaces or the people that are more connected with evangelization, that are more generous to him.
You really talk about liminal spaces, right? That I've noticed this in Catholic circles, right? Because most of the conservatives and the traditional Catholics don't occupy, like, they don't work at the mainstream Catholic colleges, right? The mainstream Catholic colleges are populated by mostly center left people whose commitments are essentially not metaphysical, but are essentially political, right? So that social justice is the coin of the realm. That's what they care about. That's what they think about, and so they hate Peterson, as you might imagine. Um, Whereas the traditionalists and the conservatives kind of have more of an uneasy relationship with him. They kind of like him because he likes to own the libs, in that
Hmm.
kind of way. But they're very quick to point out that, like, well, really anything that Peterson has to say, you can find in, Summa this or what. And it's like,
Sure.
stop, 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 stop. It's like you miss it. You're being obstinate.
Yeah,
You're
why
like,
don't you start a YouTube channel and start like
right.
reading the Summa Theologica and see
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you get a million views on
yeah.
your,
Right.
that.
It's just so right. So it's stupid that way. And I think it's like the older brother and the prodigal son energy, you know.
Yeah,
Which,
very
hey,
much.
I get it. As a long-standing, card-carrying, Sunday-going Catholic, yeah, I totally understand the older brother, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
to my
We
own
did.
to my own distress.
We just had the Sunday of the Prodigal
Yeah,
Son this
Sunday. Yeah,
Sunday.
same, yeah, yeah,
Uh, oh,
exactly.
is that for you guys too?
It was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for us, it's part of the pre-Lenten Triodian, so it's probably
Maybe
once every
actually, hold
8
on.
years that we would have the
I
same.
may be wrong on this. I may be wrong. Maybe I just have so many Orthodox friends that it's just
It's
been
popping
it's
up in
been
your
bouncing
feed.
around in my head right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, that very well could be. So sorry, folks, if I
Oh
made a
no,
mistake.
but yeah, the prodigal son is beautiful. I think I've heard it said, and I agree that the whole gospel is contained in the story of the prodigal son. If you wanted to
Yeah,
teach someone what the gospel is, it's like
yeah,
story of the prodigal son is it all. And I think that's true. It's one of the most profound stories in the Bible.
yeah. What do you make
There's
of this sort of new public moment where, folks like, Rogan and Russell Brand and Ayan Hirsi Ali are some converting like Ayan, but others sort of talking positively in the public square about maybe we need Jesus. I mean, what do you make of that?
That's a good question. I mean, it seems part of the same movement, doesn't it? Of like Peterson's sort of rise to fame, and then it seemed to kind of fizzle out. But
Mhm.
maybe like I just got used to him, but
Yeah,
maybe it
I
hasn't
wonder about that.
fizzled out.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I was thinking when we were talking earlier about like ancient things. Um, there's this word going around in my head, authenticity. I can't get rid of it.
yeah, yeah,
And there's this desire for roots, for authenticity, for something strong enough to survive the acid of liquid modernity.
yeah,
If I'm going to like wax poetic
yeah,
and Twitter brained on you,
yeah,
it's like, well, what do you believe in when everything's changing?
right,
And like everyone my age or anyone over the age of 25 is old enough to remember when like trans wasn't a thing,
yeah,
where people
yeah,
didn't have pronouns like 5 years ago, right? It was like
yeah,
5 years ago,
yeah,
really. Like
yeah,
the culture has changed so dramatically in 5 years, and let alone 10 or 20. Like I don't know, I was born in the Reagan administration.
sure,
Y-
sure.
you know, like things were different. I remember when Obama was a border hawk. Like I remember
Right.
his things that
Yeah,
you would be have a hard time convincing people were real today. I could show you videos from Barack Obama where you're like, I would want to vote for that guy as a
right.
Republican.
That's
Um,
right. That's right.
and like things have changed so rapidly, and they're only going to change more. And people, I think, are looking for something rooted, but something real.
Mhm.
And like, what do you cling to? And like, the civic nationalist is going to cling to like American patriotism, right? Like, can
Yeah.
American patriotism survive the tide of modernity? I don't know. Like, American people have like invented modernity to a large
Yeah,
extent,
exactly.
and like
Like
the
we are
idea of
modernity.
America
Yeah.
the idea of America has changed. If you really look at it, and you really say, like, does it mean to be American? What does it mean what does America stand for? Like, it changes quite rapidly, and like the periods of consistency between equilibrium breaks is like, I don't know, something on the order of 50 to 100 years
Mhm.
before like America has a new meaning,
Yeah.
and we're going through one now where it's being redefined, and so I
Yeah,
don't
but
think you can cling to Americanism. I think you need something deeper. And
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. We're walking through the doors of a church that's older than your country
yeah.
is a humbling experience.
Oh man,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, it shatters all of one's pretenses. At least it did for me. Are you familiar with the ship of Theseus problem?
mhm.
Where
Yeah.
that you change out one little plank each year, and so at certain point over the course of whatever 100 years, there's no remaining original planks from the ship of Theseus. Like, is it still the ship of Theseus? And I feel like there's been a kind of version of that as we speed run our way through these various movements, wondering where's the bottom. And I similarly have been I have similarly been struck by um the speed with which this stuff um is hitting us, and wondering, what is it, is there some sort of s- stopping mechanism? Is there some sort of, you know what's the limiting principle, if everything is up for grabs, when you know um with the various gender wars and the various sex wars and all these kinds of things, these political wars, like I just like, where's the real, like where's the terra firma? How do we ground this in something more than just the whim of whatever the news cycle shoots at us? So maybe you're right, maybe that is part of this admittance, somewhat begrudging on say someone like Rogan's part, maybe, and we'll see what he
Well,
does with this. We don't know what that's written, but maybe that there's a desire that, man, everything's washing away so quickly. What can we hold on to?
and when you look at like, I think when they can look around, maybe this is something that's going on. That when they look around at who's on the side of truth, who's on the side of what they remember goodness to be, and what
Right.
they feel is really goodness. It's the Christians. It's like, oh, Christian, Christian, Christian. So they start
Mm,
coming around.
yeah.
And Rogan's had Peterson on many times. And I remember Peterson on Rogan, and this was sort of, past the crazy phase where
Yeah.
Peterson, I feel like, fell off some. He was talking about how, the Bible is the fundamental book from
Yeah.
which all other books are derived in the Western canon, right? It's like one of the earliest usages of the codex format. Like, it is in some sense the book,
Yeah.
and like which everything else derived. And Rogan's listening to this. I don't know. I think, like, podcasting with Peterson like 4 or 5 times is part of it. And then you have like the Babylon Bee guy. Like,
Yeah.
he's a dedicated Christian, and he
Yeah.
had his moment of fame, and was one of the reasons why Elon bought Twitter.
That's right.
Um,
Wild.
it's
I mean,
like,
people.
so you look around at
Yeah.
who's fighting with you, and it's like, oh, um, it's all these
That's right.
Christians.
That's right.
um,
Well,
I
they're
think
still
that's
here.
part of
They're
it.
not going anywhere. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that that's part of it. It's like, yeah, it's who has their heads in the right place. Um,
And so,
it's rapidly becoming clear to me that uh, it's like Christ or madness.
yeah. Yeah.
You pick Christ
Yeah.
or madness. And like,
Yeah.
how many people on like this right wing, anti woke sort of bandwagon
Uh-huh.
are not Christians? It's like James Lindsay.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you can count very few.
Yeah.
Very few.
Well, because everybody wants to get back to, I've sort of been tweeting about this back and forth the last month or two, or, maybe it's a couple months back, but, sort of the sort of the myth of 1995, that a lot of these, sort of self-proclaimed classical liberals, really, really want to get back to 1995, and in 1995, Maxim magazine was a thing, you could in good conscience vote for a liberal Democrat. Harvey Weinstein was making good movies. Sure, he was harassing and abusing women, but man, those were the days, right? And so I always laugh that they want to sort of retreat back to the 1995 as the sort of the golden
Mm.
age. And I, of course, am totally skeptical of that because I was alive in 1995, and let me tell you, it was not what they remember it to be. I mean, they may have been fine, and things may have been excellent for some people, but no. I mean, this thing is as I don't know if you ever listened to Paul Vanderklay,
Oh,
but
all the
as
time,
oh yeah, I love okay,
all the
good.
time.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a
Big
big
Paul Vanderklay fan.
yeah, I'm a huge Paul stan, and he always talks about these are old and long spirits that are working through us,
Hmm.
right? And these spirits that are working through us go way back, way before 1995, right? And I think
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
maybe that there's a kind of recognition that doing a kind of rollback to 1995 just it ain't in the cards, and so maybe there's some sort of final admittance that as much as we would like to be a liberal of the old school, quote unquote, um maybe that's not enough either, and maybe it wasn't what we thought it was.
Yeah, I think we're kind of sitting in the ash, and we're
mm,
reminiscing about when the fire was less
mm,
burned.
mm,
It's like remember when there was less ash around and like there was
yeah, like
more wood, and we're like, yeah, let's go back there, but you're still on fire.
right, like yeah, right. The fire may have been pretty just then, right? And no, that's exactly right, that's exactly right.
Well, and I think I found Jordan Hall. I've bounced off him many years because I
Yeah.
found him to be a little impenetrable, and now that
Oh,
he's
interesting.
a Christian, I'm kind of interested in him. And he talks about, I think his idea of game A, game B is that like game A is a self-terminating system, and like so what we have, and it's hard to describe because he's trying to describe like all different kinds of large scale systems in our world, like
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
economically, environmentally, governmentally, like the struggle of superpowers against each other. It sort of all seems to be going to self termination,
Yeah.
and his idea of game B is like finding some way in a very holistic and like on all these different levels at once to find things that are not self terminating. Um,
Yeah, so let me, my and maybe this is too quippy, but whenever I used to listen to Jordan Hall and Rott and all those guys, and to a certain extent Brett Weinstein, and talk about Game B, I kept coming back to this idea, like, yeah, there is a Game B, and it's called the good news.
well,
Like I
that's
really,
where that's kind of where Jordan wound up.
yeah,
Like
no, I
his
think that
answer
is
to what is eternal is communion
that's right.
with his fellow beings in
Yeah,
flesh,
yeah,
in a committed communal relationship in Christ.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so that's why like you, like I wouldn't call myself an avid follower of Jordan Hall, but I certainly listened to loads of podcasts, which he was either the featured guest or one of the featured guests, and Rebel Wisdom and all that sort of stuff. And I always liked him. I thought he was an affable guy. I thought he was like pretty honest, which is what I really appreciate in a thinker and a podcast guy. It's like, oh, this is he's not an ideologue, he's philosophical. And so, on the one hand, I was like, oh man, Jordan Hall became a Christian. Wow. And on the other hand, I'm like, well, of course he did, because
mm,
he's honest. Right. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I know you're not either. It's just like this is the future. And for
mm,
me, I sort of said this on Twitter the other day. The future is liturgical and ancient.
mm.
It just is. And again, I have a fairly expansive conception of liturgy. I know I'm going to upset my ortho bro friends and my trad bro friends, but I think that liturgies are um but the more we can kind of dial them into its sort of pure, to get that sort of pure signal, I think that's where the future is, because
Well,
everything else seems to be falling apart, right? Everything seems to be recession, in full blown recession.
Yeah, liturgy, and I could use this in expansive way too. It is physical.
Yeah.
A liturgy reshapes you. Liturgy is
Mm,
participatory,
yeah.
and liturgy is never individual.
Yeah. That's right.
Like
That's right.
these, and if you're not participating in the liturgy with the Holy Spirit, then you're participating in a liturgy of some other spirit.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right. Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly.
and I
And
and,
mm,
and I would say just for people that don't get it yet, I think the reason why they don't get it is they're reducing religion down to a series of propositions.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I still have my atheist brain. I could argue against Christianity as a series of
Yeah.
propositions, where like, how could you prove that? How do you prove that? No, like, but as far as like when you have to approach things a little bit more holistically, like see how the system is shaping you, see
Mm,
the telos of the system,
yeah.
and then decide which system do I want to be part of, and
Yeah.
go look at the system that those atheists belong to, look at this, the telos of those systems, and see where is it advancing to.
Yeah.
And so when you look at things holistically like that, you're like, well, I don't know if I can completely rationally wrap my head around everything in this system, but this is where goodness is. This is where the idea of the good was invented.
Yes. Yes. No.
It comes from here. This is the root.
Yeah, that's resonant for me, because, look, especially for those of us who are intellectually minded and oriented, man, you can fall in love with a great proposition. You can, oh man, that's a great idea. Love that. Perfect. This is perfect. And I remember, like, my mom, she's such a smart woman, wise woman. I remember one time when I was going through my snotty, phase, and she said, Kale, you can spend all your time, fashioning sort of the perfect philosophy, but you know, she said something like God's not an idea, God's ultimately a relationship. And I was like 17 or 18 and like a total punk at this point. I'm like, yeah, whatever, mom, you know. But boy, that is like resonated with me forever. And it turns out that my mom was right,
Mm,
and that the mechanism by which I can commune, right, is not an idea. It is relational and participatory and all those things that we talk about in the little corner, right? It's relational, and I I wonder if people will, the internet is so geared toward abstracting everything down into zeros and ones, right? The whole system runs on zeros and ones, which is sort of the ultimate abstraction. And we can feel it pulling us apart. We can feel it turning us into sort of digital bits and bytes. And we can, it's good at that, you know. And so for me, like, the way that I am at peace with, like, what you and I are doing right now is that my hope is that the kind of things that we are talking about, and yeah, sure, there are plenty of propositions here, right? But the
mhm.
kinds of things that we are talking about will hopefully um uh orient and send people back into relations with other people off of Zoom and off of StreamYard and off of YouTube. I mean, again, seeing this as a sort of a pathway, but not a destination.
Yeah.
And that's my hope, for these kinds of conversations, is that they're doing
It,
what Jordan Hall's doing.
yeah. And maybe that's what makes Paul Vanderklay kind of great, is because he does direct people, but he understands that hierarchy, and he does
Yeah,
constantly direct people back into real life.
yeah,
Um, I think there is a struggle here, which is that there's a limit to there's a limit to the power of online evangelism, just because you can't achieve communion online. Like, you can watch a church live stream on YouTube, but it's not the same thing, right? It's
no,
not.
exactly. And then look, anybody who's going to look you in the face and not admit that is just not, like, walk away. They're not being real. They're not being serious.
Yeah.
And we all knew this, right? I mean, look, for me, I don't know how it was for you, but when my church, all of it, like from the top, all the way from the tippy top in Rome, said that all of a sudden I didn't need to go to mass on Sundays, I don't think people fully comprehend how devastating that um became. It it turned everybody into hypocrites. And
Yeah.
so there you are, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm assembled the family, and we're watching a live stream mass for the first time. And I just remember thinking, like, okay, I'm doing this because I want some degree of continuity and normalcy for my children, right? I want them to understand that yes, these are crazy things going on, but come on, like, stiff upper lip, let's keep things going. But I'm sitting there internally being like, this is crazy, this is absurd, you know. And um and we know that it's not the same thing. And so I've become a meat space evangelist, right? That
Mm,
even the
mm,
stuff that we're doing right here, if anybody watches this and takes
mm,
anything away from it, I want you to hear me clearly that YouTube space is fine, but it's a mechanism, it's a funnel to get you into real
mm.
spaces, into real living rooms, into real churches, and to real restaurants, and real tables and real chairs with other people. Like, that's what this is for. And to pretend that we can sort of live in this simulacra is, I think, naive, maybe, but also probably there's a kind of nastiness, at those that want to promote the idea that this is a worthy substitute.
Yeah, and like you are where you spend your time,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
I probably spend too much of my time online on Twitter, getting my brain sliced into a million chunks, like many of us. But I do spend quite a bit of time too in liturgical spaces and real spaces, and that's what I'm hoping will save me, or will point me
Sure.
in a positive direction in a world that otherwise seems to want to pull me apart.
Well, look,
Um,
we do what we have to do, right? I mean, it's like I remember, like, watching the Flintstones, right? If you watch the
mm,
Flintstones, Fred and Barney, they going down to the quarry. They don't want to live in the quarry, right? But they spend their time in the quarry because they do what they have to do because Betty and Wilma, because Betty and Wilma are back at the on the home front, doing the child rearing and whatnot, and, like, so we have to go out and we have to find ways to sort of earn a living. And right now, for a lot of us, it's going to be, for you, we were talking about this before, you do home stuff at home, but you're doing digital work, right? You're a
that's
digital,
right.
right? And so, look, that's going to the quarry,
Mhm.
but you're not sitting around pretending like, oh man, what I would really like to do is really, like, plug my entire self into the matrix. Like, that's what I really want to do. Like, no, of course not. And so,
Yeah.
I think as long as you have a healthy sense of skepticism about the digital space as anything other than that which is necessary, then, come on. You know.
Thank you for that, Kale. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, but I mean it. I mean it. I really do. I really do.
Well, I feel like there's something like the Marxists are incredibly evil and awful people, but they're right about like something about like life being alienating,
Totally.
especially as like the structure of capital advances and
Totally.
gets more complex.
Totally.
Like what we do for work doesn't feel like work should,
Yeah.
um, and it's a psychological problem that a lot of us struggle with. I'd probably be happier if I was like, I don't know, hunting animals all day or
Yeah.
whatever it was people did for work before
Yeah.
we invented machines. But here we are. We got to go to the quarry.
That's
I'm
right.
getting married this year,
Oh,
so
nice. I didn't know
uh,
that.
I
Congratulations. I'm
think
a
that'll
big believer. I'm
help.
a big believer in it. So that's awesome.
I think that'll help. Put a good uh, gloss on the need to go to the quarry,
Yeah.
because we don't have that. It's like, why am I going to the quarry again?
Right.
But when you have a Betty or Wilma at home, then maybe it
Yeah. And
hits a
look,
little different.
honestly, like, that simple revelation, is that's wisdom, right? I
Mhm.
remember, and it's really easy to be a nihilist, practical nihilist, when you don't have responsibilities. And I think men in
Mhm.
particular are really prone to a kind of default nihilism if there's no reason to come home from the quarry, and so I don't, that is not surprising to me at all. I didn't get married until I was, let's see, I was 32, so I lived, a solid
Mhm.
decade of my life, as a single guy, just sort of bopping around and, trying to make my way. And, I didn't, I mean, whatever. I mean, honestly, I probably just frittered away most of my time. I mean, I made good friends, no regrets and that sort of thing. And I led a pretty, a reasonably righteous life. It wasn't like I was going off and, destroying things in my wake. But as soon as you get married and as soon as you have children, there's a way, that's just real, it's like,
Mhm.
it's very,
Mhm.
very real. And, I bang on about this quite a bit, the passion for the real and the search for the real. And I would say that what the spell of the digital space is that sense that maybe it's more real online.
Mhm.
Maybe it's better online. And I think that's, honestly, and I don't use this word very lightly, but I do think that's a demonic spirit,
Mhm.
that makes you want to just, what, it'll all be over soon. Let me just plug myself fully into the machine and be done with it. And I personally believe that we have to resist that with every fiber of our being. That we have to develop certain protocols with which to, throw on the hazmat suit and go into the quarry and do our thing.
Mhm.
But recognize that that is purposeful, and we can come out of the quarry and we can, take off the hazmat suit and scrub ourselves down, because we're not meant to be there, or all that work that we are doing there is for something else and for something more real, which is human. And yeah, that's my faith.
That's beautiful.
Mm.
I like to avoid the thought pattern that like our day is worse than every other day. Maybe it is
Yes,
in some
it's
ways.
tempting. No, I totally get, you're right, it's tempting,
Uh,
it's tempting.
but the more I get in history, a thought that gives me comfort is the more I study history, the more I learn about history. I'm like, well, the early Christians, they lived under a hostile military dictatorship that like killed them, right?
Yep.
Like they,
Real,
the Roman Empire
real.
from time to time,
Would
think
flex.
about how much our government hates us. Well, they're not quite feeding us the lions
Yeah,
yet, right?
yeah.
And then I was just Martyr Made had this beautiful, awful podcast about Eastern Europe under Soviet occupation
Mm,
after World War II, during and
mm,
after World War II.
mhm,
Um, and it goes through the Holodomor. It goes
mhm,
through
mhm.
the Soviet occupation of Germany, in which they raped something like 2 million women, just like every woman for hundreds of miles, like they
Yeah.
just raped and killed.
Yeah, it's just like,
Um,
and you just wanna, like, pause on that just for a second. Like, just pause on that for just a second. You're like, "Wait, what? What happened?" Like, you just lose yourself in the abstraction of that number, but you're like, every one of those, that's a person,
Picture like every woman in North Carolina being raped or killed
yeah,
or both.
right.
Like,
Like, right, again, it's like, listen to that, but yeah, no, that's, wow,
so a
yeah,
lot of times also when I think about modern politics and like why it's so screwed up, it's like people lived through hell and like
yeah,
their psychology just never quite like, people are willing, like, what are we not willing to do after you've been through that?
yeah, yeah.
Like, what are you not willing to do? Um, you know, uh, and
Well,
then he concludes that podcast talking
mm,
about um, the Soviet prison in Romania,
mm,
where they basically took the seminary students and they tortured them to get them to. They wanted to find the most pious people they could and see if they could make them hate God and love communism
wow,
through torture.
wow,
Um, and they tried, and
yeah,
it was it's one of the most ugly,
mm,
like horrific and most nihilistic thing anyone's ever done. And in its ugliness and all of that kind of just puts my life into perspective where I'm like,
yeah.
oh, you know, I can go downstairs and make a snack and
You're right,
like
right, right. I got,
and
yeah,
that's something like that a whole country full of people like couldn't do until they died, until they ate
right,
their children, swap children to eat their neighbor's children, and they,
wow,
give my child to my neighbor to eat, and then we both die
right,
anyway.
right,
Like there's just like so much to be grateful for. Uh, um, but in some ways, I do believe we have achieved depths of depravity that nobody else has, and one of those I think is isolation. Like I do think we are
yeah,
the most isolated society that has ever existed. And that is the great evil. It's not quite as in your face as, military marching down your street, laying waste to every household that it meets for no reason. It's not quite as evil as being locked in a hostile prison that's bent on your psychological destruction of your soul. It was actually a soul weapon.
Yeah. Right.
The Soviets are atheists. Well, no, I mean, they're not atheists because they believed in the soul. They were trying to kill someone's soul. They're trying to kill their souls.
Right.
But our poison is more subtle, and I think it is the poison of isolation.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's the fear, or the fear is not quite the right word, but again, it's like I'm almost impressed by it, but not, the is that it's largely not coercive, right? It's an elective enemy that is kind of shocking, that it's not the jackboot model, where at least, like your reference of the Holodomor and the Soviet evil, like that's clear, right? Like you can look at that and you say, man, that is nasty. That is a stronger person doing things to weak people, but we seem to have placed our focus, our weaponry on the very fabric of communion, and man, that's it's almost worse, because nobody yet has a gun to my head or your head. It's like we choose to do this, we choose our prison here, and that's to me, that's the more subtle evil, because it's harder to like point and blame. Like for me, it's easy to like, oh, that nasty guard, or that awful regiment that wiped through an entire village, raping and pillaging. It's like I can point to that. But with this, you have to sort of say, well, I am choosing this in some way. I'm participating in this, like you say, much more subtle form of evil, no less dehumanizing, and maybe even more so.
But I guess the good news is that it's like super easy to fight this kind of evil. I mean, it's like go to church.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Go to church, take communion, be part of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
It's like it's not that hard. It's actually quite pleasant most of the time.
Yeah. Like I rather
sometimes
like
you feel a little bored or something, or if you're Orthodox, you stand up the whole time. So
the whole time.
tired,
Yeah. That's right. So at least I get to sit from time to time. My goodness.
you do. But it's really not that hard, and mostly pleasant.
Yeah.
Like it's beautiful. It's thought provoking. You get the time passes quite quickly. So most of the time. So it's like, and it fights against, I think, the greatest evil of our time. So it's like pretty good.
That's right. I think
pretty
that's
good
right.
deal.
Yeah.
Feels like we went through a narrative arc right there, Kale.
I love it.
Hold on a second. I got my roommate knocking on my door.
Yeah.
Hey, people are going to Quips. Sure, I'll go to Quips. Okay. When? When? Okay, I'm wrapping up a podcast. I'll be right there.
Dude, Quips it is, man. Do it. Do it.
It's like this British pub near here. They have good
I love it.
And good
where do you live, Jake?
I live in Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Lancaster County. All right, I love it. So
it's beautiful. It's awesome. It's Amish country.
Yeah.
So there's like a strong pious influence, but we have an Amtrak that takes you to like New York City, DC, Philly, stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
that's an easy get. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
It gets like a little bit of the culture drifting in from the major city, but it has like this bedrock of piety, which results in some weird things. Like we have like we have like the premier Christian like Broadway theater, basically that does like high production value musicals with like real animals, like doing Noah's Ark and stuff.
Wild.
And it's like it's a weird place to be, but it's a wonderful place to be.
That's cool. That's cool. I love it.
Yeah, I found my way here after a lot of wandering, sort of accidentally, but I'm planning to just put down some roots and stay.
That's good. Good. Yeah. I recommend it if you can.